love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Whoa, you are the peace in my troubled sea.
Hi friends, welcome to Roots and Shoots time for today. I'm glad that you could join me. Let's bow our heads and have a word of prayer together, and then we can jump into our story time for today. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us all together today, whether you are children or adults. Please open our hearts to your word. Help us to think about these bits from your story and how we can apply them to our lives to make the world around us a better place and to make our hearts closer to yours. Amen. So we are working through our summer series called Living Waters. So every week we learn about a different body of water and then about a connection to God's story. So this week, we have been talking about actual bodies of water, like the oceans and the rivers and the lakes and the seas and that kind of stuff. But today we're not actually talking about something that is a body of water itself. Instead, it is something that people like to do on a body of water. This activity is something that people all over the world do for fun and also to feed their families. This can be done very humbly with a stick standing on a rock beside the shore, or all the way up in levels of fanciness, all the way to using fancy equipment in a boat. You have any guesses? We're talking about fishing today. This is a really fun thing that a lot of people do, and you may have done this with your family, with someone that you love who's teaching you about these skills. Fishing is very important to the way of life in Thunder Bay for many people, but also for all over the world. People everywhere basically eat some kind of fish from the water around them. Fish can be eaten raw or cooked. When you're going to cook fish, of course, there's lots of different ways to do it. You can fry it, you can grill it, you can pickle it, you can marinate it, you can smoke it. That's my favorite. Steamed, just tons of different yummy ways to eat fish. So we know we like to eat fish, most of us. How do we fish? So there's lots of different ways to fish. The most popular way in most parts of the world is the traditional form of bait fishing. Bait fishing is when you take a piece of bait, like a worm, for example, and you put it on a hook, and you cast your line into the water until a fish chomps down on it. The hook gets stuck, and you can reel in the fish, and ta-da, you have some lunch. You can do this from a boat, you can do it from a dock or a pier, you can do it from the shore. It's a pretty straightforward way of fishing. Just be careful not to sink your hook into your thumb. If you do this kind of fishing, traditional bait fishing, in the wintertime, in Thunder Bay area or in many parts of the world, you are going to have to chop through some ice to get down to the actual water. This is called ice fishing, and it is very popular in our area, in particular in Thunder Bay, because of course our winters are so long. Some people prefer or also like a method of fishing called fly fishing. So in this method, the angler takes a fake fly. They make them out of yarn or string. I've never actually made one, but they look really intricate and cool when I see people kind of like knitting them together. Or you can just buy one too. So they take this fake bug and they stick it on their hook, and they put on the end of their line, which is a heavier weight than other fishing line. And basically they flick the rod back and forth so that the fish thinks that a fly or whatever is landing on the surface of the water. That's delicious to them, so chomp, hopefully. So this kind of fishing requires a very flexible rod. And like you really have to master this like swooping motion. It's not just something you can do just out of the blue. It also requires rubber pants because this type of fishing is done right in the water. A commercial fisherman catches fish to be sold for a profit. So a commercial fisherman uses techniques such as traditional fishing poles or trolling, maybe nets or traps. A company that practices commercial fishing on a large scale is an industrial fishing company. Industrial fishing companies catch fish to be sold for a profit, just like a commercial fisherman, but on a much larger scale. And industrial fishing companies often use these large fishing factory ships, and it's kind of like an all-in-one deal. They stay out in the water for weeks at a time. These boats can catch, clean, chop, and freeze the fish all in one go, just like a little assembly line type thing. Ready to roll, ready to be sold as soon as they get back into the shore. Sometimes these companies get in trouble for their unethical, unscrupulous, naughty ways that they make their catches. So sometimes they have to be kept an eye on. Not all the time, sometimes. But whether you're fishing on a small scale or on a larger scale, you need more than the right equipment to catch fish. You also need bait. So not just any bait. You need to know what you're trying to catch and what they eat, what they're drawn to, so that you can actually have a successful fishing trip. Because if you put something down that they're not interested in, you're not going to have a great fishing adventure. You're not going to catch anything, right? So this can mean maybe you bring some worms, some big flashy lures, some minnows, even some chunks of meat sometimes, little bugs like flies, those little fly fishing things. You need to find out what lives in the waters where you're trying to fish and find out what that thing is drawn to, and then you use that to lure it in to catch it. People have been fishing for literally thousands of years. Researchers studying ancient archaeological sites have found hooks and other fishing equipment made out of shell and bone that actually look like they probably would work pretty well. In our area, what we know of as what is now called Thunder Bay and around, all around this area, before the settlers came here, there was Ojibwe people here living well-established lives. And the Ojibwe people depended on fish for the major part of their diet. And they fished year-round to feed their families. The women used a few different techniques depending on what they wanted to catch and where they were trying to catch it. They could use traps, they could use lines with hooks, they would weave nets together and use them, trolling techniques with their canoes. The men handled all the spear fishing and the ice fishing, kind of split the duties there. And depending on what time of year it was and how much food they had available at that time, the meat was either cooked right away or preserved to eat later. And in wintertime, they would actually freeze a whole fish without cleaning it so that they could use the entire body of this creature later to be respectful of its life. So a local knowledge keeper that we know has shared with me that to say, let's go fishing in Ojibwe, you say, Ambe Nunjigi Gun Yiwe. And that's probably butchering it quite a bit. But I think it's really cool that we have elders and knowledge keepers around here keeping these traditions alive and part of our lives. So one other way that we know of that people in the past fished was with nets. And we know this from the Bible because it talks about fishing with nets actually quite a bit. Whether Jesus was feeding 5,000 people with a few fish and a bit of bread, or he's walking on water, or he's calming a storm, much of Jesus' ministry happens in the New Testament at a place called the Sea of Galilee. And that's in the same part of the world that we have been talking about a lot lately, the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. So we know that during his ministry, Jesus spent a lot of time teaching and fellowshipping with people along the shores of this particular sea. And no wonder, because this is where so many of the people that lived here worked here and spent so much of their time here. They are surrounded by desert in this part of the world. So it actually makes perfect sense that the people flocked to the shores of the Sea of Galilee. It also makes sense that the fishing economy that was at the very heart of their community was very strong here. Catching fish was incredibly important to the people that lived here at this time. And in the book of Luke, we read about how Jesus got to know some of these local fishermen and how they actually started the group that would be known as the disciples. They were some of Jesus's closest friends. So the book of Luke tells us that Jesus was standing along the shores of the sea one day. He was teaching people there. And the people that were there were really interested in what Jesus had to say. So they're getting closer and closer and closer to him. And so to make space for himself, personal space, Jesus is like stepping back. And he's stepping back and stepping back. And he's in the water at this point probably. And not really happy to be pushed into the water. Jesus looks around and sees that there's some fishing boats nearby. So he hops onto one of them. And they're cleaning up their nets. So this seems to be fine with everybody. And the book of Luke tells us that when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet, if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled for their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats, so they began to sink. That's from Luke 5:4-7. So at this point, Simon knows that he's obviously dealing with someone who's incredibly special. So he falls to his knees in front of Jesus and he calls him Lord and he asks for his grace. He knows that he's a sinner. And everybody's looking around and they can't believe their eyes at how many fish they caught so quickly after a full night of catching nothing, just because they had faith and stepped forward and trusted Jesus' word and his instructions. So then Jesus tells Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be the fisher of men." Okay, so that's all these men needed to hear. They pulled in their boats and they dedicated their lives to following Jesus at that point. So, fisher of men. Let's go back for a minute here. What does that mean? So Simon and his friends, they're fishermen. They're used to catching tilapia in the Sea of Galilee, not people. So what does that mean to them? And what does that mean to us today as people who are learning, again, more about God's kingdom as we can and trying to follow Jesus' ways? Well, it does not mean to grab a fishing net and throw it over your friend's head. Sorry. What Jesus is saying is that people who follow in his ways are going to draw people closer to God. Instead of using a net or a hook, Jesus wants us to use love. You can have all the right fishing equipment as a church. You can have a nice building with beautiful windows. You can have a great worship team. You can have fantastic snacks. You can have engaging speakers. You can have everything, and that's great. But if you don't have the bait, you're not going to catch anything. And that bait is love, no matter what kind of people you're trying to catch. If you read through the Gospels, you will see how Jesus used love to draw people closer to God. And that love, more than anything, led them to believe and then to go out and to also share God's love with other people and to tell other people about Jesus. And it also made them treat the people around them better and treat the people in their lives better. It made everything around them better. It also brought in a whole bunch of new challenges for them. But overall, this was a really good thing. So how do we spread that bait in our lives today? Well, one of the best ways that we can do that is by being a good friend. That means being there for your friends, supporting them, listening to them, being a good listener. It also means looking out for people that don't have a lot of friends and being there for them and opening that door to friendship for them. That can be really hard, but that's exactly what it means to be a fisher of men. People may think that you're strange for doing these kind of things, but we are fishers of men. We are Jesus followers. And that means that we are people who are saved by Jesus, and we have been asked to share love with other people. And yeah, it's not always easy sometimes, but it's always a good place to fall back to. If you make sharing love your basic point that you start everything from, and you step forward in faith, trusting that as you do your best, Jesus will help you to find the way, and God will use your actions and everything to help others. That's a great place to start every day from. So it's worth a try. So I really hope that everyone is doing well. This week we are doing home group church. And next week we're back to doing our large gathering in person. If you feel comfortable, you're more than welcome to join us. But I know that this pandemic is not over yet, even though it seems kind of like it's wrapping up in some parts of the world. But it's not over for everyone until, it's over for everyone. So if you are still online, please know that I am thinking of you, and that I hope that you feel seen and you feel cared for and you feel loved this week. Hang in there, and we'll see you again next time.
Say too short.